Have your members been given clarity as to the way forward during stage 4 lockdown? Is enough information being given?
Good afternoon, Kieran, and thanks very much for having me. Look, we certainly at this stage are still scrambling for information. We've got a very strong relationship with Ag Victoria, and they are also desperately trying to put together information. But I think what we know is that they are that the wheels are in motion so far as trying to give us a very clear, simple direction, both on staff that are allowed to be on site and PPE. But at this stage, we still don't have that yet.
And so in relation to the 33% reduction in processing, if it comes off the current level, which is already at a low capacity, will that lead to meat shortages?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what we're really looking at trying to figure out here, because essentially if it is at a peak time, then in fact, if we're reducing staff numbers from peak time right down to 66% of that, then in fact it would be something that we would be able to work with, would be manageable for the 6-week period that we're looking at. However, we still have not yet got that information to hand, and as such, we saw with the Premier's address today that there still is some difficulty in getting a clear understanding of what that means. It's not about our throughput, it is about the staff on site. That is what we know at the moment, together with our utilisation of PPE. Also, the Premier has mentioned that they need to look like healthcare workers. Well, in a lot of circumstances within processing facilities, they do already. So we also need to be making sure logistically that people are going to be actually able to utilise PPE in that way. And we're going to have to do that with WorkSafe Victoria to make sure that there's no OH&S concerns with the utilisation of PPE as well.
Indeed, and that we'll get to that in a bit more detail in a moment. But most processors at the moment, just to clarify, are already operating well below capacity due to the time of the year and due to other factors, not the least of which the recent drought and other factors at play.
Absolutely correct, Kieran. And I would say again, it's the terminology that we've got to get right here. So when the Premier talks about peak, and then he seems to talk about other things after that, what we determine as being peak is obviously the peak time of year. Now, at this stage, obviously during winter and coming off droughts, certainly New South Wales, Queensland, but in parts of Victoria as well, we are going through a herd and flock rebuild. However, in saying that, I think we've got to be cognizant that this 6-week period can be the only 6-week period where we can manage that. If this was ever extended past that process, then areas such as our spring lamb flush, as well as giving and sending messages to farmers across Victoria and in other states in that regard, is going to be very difficult for us. We must remember 50% of all lamb production, 40% of mutton production, and 20% of beef production all come from Victoria at any stage throughout the year.
Yeah, okay. Now, so that's obviously a big concern. And if it is reduced from the current level, is it a situation where some processes simply won't be viable to stay open at that level?
Well, if it was reduced from, the Premier said yesterday, reduced from this time last week. Well, that's untenable, because basically the majority of processing facilities wouldn't be able to operate at a 33% reduction on last week's capacity. That's just not, as I said, that's just untenable. However, his terminology in regards to peak, and that's the terminology that we've been working on with Ag Victoria, is in fact then what it should mean, which is peak. So therefore, we're looking at that reduction from 33% on a peak level. That's what we're operating to, and until we're told otherwise, that's what we need to be reviewing about. And, we've got a lot of processing facilities, beef, lamb, goat, mutton, chicken, pork throughout Victoria, large, medium and small, together with our major small goods manufacturers, large, medium and small as well. So there's a lot of individual businesses that employ tens of thousands of Victorians at the moment that are having to make decisions that potentially are going to come into a force at 11:59 on Friday. Now, if we can't get this right at this present time, we're not really sending a great message to those individuals, because the Premier is pretty clear in regards to one thing, and that's the deadline.
And when it comes to the personal protective equipment, if we go back to that issue, one of the concerns is that with gowns and with gloves, that they can be caught in the machinery.
Absolutely, and that's why, as I said previously, we need to be working with WorkCover Victoria and other OH&S regulators to ensure that whilst PPE utilisation up and down the supply chain sounds wonderful, at a lot of situations that it actually is not as feasible. And in fact, we are the world leaders in the utilisation of PPE from basically throughout our supply chain. So we've got to be really clear and concise with our processing facilities and our small goods manufacturing. We don't want to be in a position where we're asking people to utilise PPE when it basically is unrequired. So our industry has been wearing masks for the last 10 weeks. Where this virus actually comes from, the community has only been wearing it for the last week. So again, we've got to recognise, and we talk about clusters in our industry. Clusters in our industry, each cluster potentially makes up from a low scale of about 5% to a high scale of about 25% of staff ratio, as opposed to a whole within a cluster. So if there's a cluster of 100, what we're seeing across the board in small goods and red meat processing is that it might only represent about between 15 to 20 staff. So the Premier also mentioned this on Friday. What's the bigger concern is about what the other 80, which is linked to our processing facilities in a cluster, how are they actually getting it? Is it actually linked to the processing facility itself when they're not staff members at all, and a lot of occasions aren't family members at all? As an industry, we take all this exceptionally seriously. We take our responsibilities very seriously, and we understand that there has been the virus has come onto our facilities and has spread in facilities, and we're managing that. But we take these very seriously, and we're the only industry in the world, from processing perspective, that's actually shut down. If we look at America and we look at Europe and we look at other areas, they have remained open. So therefore, we have been shutting down, doing the right thing, going through the process. But we've also got members at the moment who have shut down. They're at day 18, day 19. There's some that have had less than 10% of cases per their whole staffing, yet they still are not open. So there's a whole range of work that we've got to do. Ag Victoria doing a fantastic job, but in other jurisdictions within the Victorian government, I say, are also letting down Ag Victoria and the meat industry in getting this sorted and getting it sorted quickly.
Patrick Hutchinson, CEO of the Australian Meat Industry Council, appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.